We look at the LA Kings scouting department and in particular the man that's been running the Kings drafts for 16 years. That's next on Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. On today's episode of Locked On LA Kings, we look at longtime LA Kings Director of Amateur Scouting, Mark Yannetti, and discuss how he and his staff over the years have helped put together a collection of talent that has helped rebuild the Kings, have them win a couple of Stanley Cups, and now do the rebuilding process again. I'm Eddie Garcia. I'm your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years. For the past 20 plus years, I've been at the Fox Sports Radio Network, where I'm a co-host, sidekick, reporter, NHL insider on occasion. I'm also host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years, and also a passionate LA Kings fan for the past 30 years. Mark Yannetti is a name you might not know, but you probably should. If you don't, he has his fingerprints all over the LA Kings roster for the past 16 years. After a couple of years as a scout, he was named the Kings Director of Amateur Scouting on June the 5th of 2007 and has been heading the team's scouting department and leading the Kings in the NHL draft ever since. He served under both Dean Lombardi and current Kings general manager Rob Blake. So we are painting with a very broad brush here when we're talking about the job that Mark Yannetti has done. And he's been doing it, like I said, for 16 years. I don't know how that ranks as far as longest tenured director of amateur scouts at the NHL level. I'm guessing it's got to be pretty high. And to have survived a GM change as well is something you don't see every day. Now, granted, Rob Blake was the assistant GM when Dean Lombardi was dismissed and was elevated to the general manager position. So it wasn't like you brought in somebody else from an outside organization and he comes in and then he wants to kind of bring in all of his people. So that made it an easier transition for Rob Blake and I'm sure working alongside Mark Yannetti, liking the job that he had been doing and deciding to keep him on the staff. As far as what we're going to do here today, we are painting with a very broad brush. This is a 25-minute podcast. It's not like you can do a super deep dive onto all of these draft picks and kind of how, the scouting department has done under Mark Yannetti. And again, he's been doing it for a long time. So we're going to kind of cut it in half today, talk about the other picks on tomorrow's show. But for today, we're going to focus on 2007 until 2013. And then we'll do the rest of the draft tomorrow. And when you're talking about grading drafts and critiquing the people behind the scenes who make these picks, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And sometimes there are not easy answers, even though we would like for them to be easy. Certain years, you're picking in different places. Sometimes you don't have a first round pick. Sometimes you have multiple picks. Sometimes you're trying to restock a team that is a Stanley Cup contender. And sometimes you're trying to restock a team that is rebuilding and maybe your philosophy changes as far as that goes. So again, just kind of giving out the information as far as who the players were that were selected in a given year. Did they become NHL players or not? And how many players didn't? And what about the picks that were very high in the draft that didn't work out? Those are kind of some of the broad things I think you look at when you're kind of grading an NHL draft. And also, I think when it's a scouting department, your job is to select the best assets that you can. Now, what the organization decides to do with those assets is out of your hands. But your job, again, is to pick the best players possible so that those players can eventually become assets for the team, whether it's making the NHL roster for that particular team or whether it is using those players, those prospects that are developing to bring in other pieces. So just a lot of stuff to keep in mind. But again, it's a very general, broad look at some of these drafts in critiquing the job that Mark Yannetti has done as the Kings Director of Amateur Scouting. So we're going to start, back in 2017, just a couple of weeks after he got the job or was elevated to the position, because he was in the Kings organization as a scout, elevated to the director of amateur scouting. And just a couple of weeks later, lo and behold, he was running the draft for the LA Kings, or at least he had his title on there. And in 2007, the Kings would have 10 players, 10 selections to choose from. And 4 of the players they selected would go on to have pretty solid NHL careers. Now, the first player they selected, the first pick of Mark Yannetti's tenure, was defenseman Thomas Hickey. He was a first-round pick, 4th overall, and he did not end up playing a single game for the LA Kings. So you could say, oh, that's not a good start for Mark Yannetti and his staff. However, he would go on to be a legitimate NHL player. It just turned out it wasn't with the Kings. Now, he had kind of toiled in the minor leagues for 4 or 5 seasons, and then he got picked up off waivers by the New York Islanders, and then he would go on to play 7 seasons with the New York Islanders and have a decent NHL career, almost 500 games at the NHL level. Of course, it wasn't with the Kings, but again, that's not the scouting department's that's the issue. They're in charge of picking a player that they feel has the talent to play at the NHL level. What happens to him after that is kind of out of their hands. Although you could argue with the 4th overall pick, that's one you got to hit on more often than not. Clearly, Thomas Hickey wasn't that type of impactful player. But again, as far as just selecting a guy who would be a solid contributor at the NHL level, Thomas Hickey was that. So I guess you'd have to say that was a hit for the Kings scouting department. They also selected Wayne Simmons with a 2nd-round pick, 61st overall in 2007. Of course, Wayne Simmons would have he's playing in the NHL. He was with the Toronto Maple Leafs last season. He had a nice few seasons with the LA Kings. He was one of my favorite players. He was a big fan favorite because he was a real tough guy, would drop the gloves with anyone. He still had some scoring ability and was just a very intense, kind of feisty player that it's easy to root for. He would end up being traded to the Philadelphia Flyers in the Mike Richards deal. So he was one of those pieces that was used to help the Kings win a Stanley Cup. Also in 2007, Alec Martinez was a 4th-round pick of the Kings, the 95th overall selection. Obviously a huge impactful player for the Kings in helping them win a pair of Stanley Cups, still having a productive career to this day with the Vegas Golden Knights. So that was a great 4th-round pick for the LA Kings. Also selected in the 4th round, 109th overall, was forward Dwight King, another guy who wasn't a superstar but had a solid NHL career, helped the LA Kings win a Stanley Cup playing in their bottom 6 of the forwards, a physical presence, did his job, and was a contributor to the Kings winning the Stanley Cup. So I think that's a pretty decent draft for the Kings. Again, the Thomas Hickey thing, they didn't hit as far as him with the Kings. But you got 4 players out of the 10 you selected that turned out to be pretty solid NHL players, and a couple of them that helped the Kings win Stanley Cups, and Alec Martinez and Dwight King. 2008, the Kings had 9 selections. 2 would go on to have solid NHL careers. One of them is a superstar still playing for the Kings to this day, and that is defenseman Drew Dowdy. He was the 1st-round pick of the Kings in 2008, the 2nd player taken overall after Steven Stamkos. And the criticism, if you want to call it that, would be, well, how could you not hit on the 2nd overall pick? I mean, that's a pick you got to hit every time. If the Lightning would have selected Drew Dowdy, you would have selected Steven Stamkos, and that would have been a hit as well. So, again, the argument would be that Mark Yannetti and his staff didn't have to do a hell of a lot of heavy lifting to select Drew Dowdy, and that's true. But when you're looking at their resume and you see a future Hall of Fame player was selected by him and his staff, how can you not give him credit for that? So obviously Drew Dowdy, probably the best selection that Mark Yannetti has made in his tenure as the Kings Director of Amateur Scouting. Also in 2008, they selected defenseman Slava Voinov, 2nd round, 32nd overall. He's another guy who helped the Kings win a Stanley Cup. Unfortunately, he had the issues off the ice that ended his Kings career and his NHL career. I don't know that that's something you could scout. You don't know what guys do in their personal lives. He didn't have any issues with the law as far as I know before the Kings drafted him. So they did select a player who contributed at the NHL level. So that was a solid pick there. I will say, though, the Kings did have 2 first-round picks in 2008 in the top 13. We talked about Drew Dowdy. The other one was another defenseman, 13th overall, and that was Colton Tubert. And that was a miss. There's no other way to say it. That was a swing and a miss for Mark Yannetti and his staff. He played 24 games in the NHL, none with the LA Kings. He was a part of a trade that helped the Kings out. They sent him to Edmonton to get Dustin Penner in return, and Penner did win a Stanley Cup for the LA Kings. So it did turn into something. But obviously 2008 is always going to be remembered as the Drew Dowdy draft. 2009, the Kings had 10 selections. 5 would go on to be very solid NHL players. This was an excellent draft for Mark Yannetti and his staff. Their first pick in the first round, 5th overall, was forward Braden Shen. Now, he didn't turn out to be a star player for the Kings, but he has turned out to be a very solid player at the NHL level, helped the St. Louis Blues win a Stanley Cup a couple years ago. He, along with Wayne Simmons, was a part of the Mike Richards trade to Philadelphia. So he was used to bring in a player that helped the Kings win a couple of Stanley Cups. Also in that 2009 draft, the second round pick, 35th overall forward Kyle Clifford, another guy who helped the Kings win a pair of Stanley Cups. He's still playing in the NHL with the Toronto Maple Leafs. One of those guys that's easy to like, a tough guy, but he had some ability to put the puck in the net. He would go strong to the net, be a physical presence. That's a solid pick in the second round for the LA Kings in 2009. Also in 2009, third round pick, 84th overall, Nick Delorier was a Kings selection. Actually, I had forgotten about that. He's still playing in the NHL. He just got a decent contract to play with the Philadelphia Flyers. He's another guy, kind of a Kyle Clifford type, a rugged forward who provides a physical presence, will drop the gloves. Delorier was sent to Buffalo in a trade that brought Braden McNabb to the LA Kings back in the day. Also in that 2009 draft, Jordan Nolan was a 7th round pick, 189th overall. He teamed up with Dwight King to play in the bottom 6 for the Kings when they won a couple of Stanley Cups. So a great contributor there out of the 7th round. And also a 7th round pick for the Kings, 198th overall, was Nick Dowd, who's still playing in the NHL. He's with the Washington Capitals now. Didn't have a spectacular career with the LA Kings, but a guy who was a solid NHL player. You get him in the 7th round, and obviously that is saying something. So again, of 10 players selected in 2009, 5 go on to have very solid NHL careers, including a couple of guys who helped the Kings win Stanley Cups, and Kyle Clifford and Jordan Nolan. That was an excellent draft for the LA Kings. Moving on to 2010, the Kings would have 5 selections. 2 would go on to play at the NHL level. The first one was defenseman Derek Forbert. He was the Kings' first-round pick, 15th overall. Now, again, he did not really hit with the Kings. He had a few decent seasons, but he would ended up being traded away to Calgary. He's now playing for the Boston Bruins as a second, third pairing guy, but a guy who's first-round pick. You kind of expect more out of him, but at the same time, he has had a solid NHL career. Also in 2010, Tyler Toffoli, second-round pick, 47th overall. Obviously teamed up with Tanner Pearson, who we'll talk about in a second, on that 70s line, helping the Kings to win a Stanley Cup. Solid contributor. Tyler Toffoli still playing well now with the Vancouver Canucks. He was traded to, he's with the Calgary Flames. He was traded to Vancouver by the Kings for some picks, and also for prospect Tyler Madden, who we'll have to wait and see if he ever makes it to the NHL level. A couple other names just to throw out there that you might remember from the 2010 draft. They certainly weren't stars, but guys who played at the NHL level, and Jordan Wheel and Kevin Grewal. 2011, the Kings had 6 selections, but no first-round picks. 2 players that they selected to go on to play at the NHL, but neither of them were very spectacular players, frankly. Forward Andy Andrioff was a 3rd-round pick, the 80th pick overall. He's still kicking around in the New York Islanders organization. And you wouldn't know this because I've only been doing this show for about a month and a half. But Andy Andrioff was one of those guys. You might be able to relate to this. He was a guy I loved to hate. And I don't know Andy Andrioff. He could be an awesome guy, maybe a great teammate, but he was one of those guys, and you probably can relate to somebody like this, either past or present, that every time he got on the ice, you were like, God, that guy stinks. He doesn't do anything to help out the team. I could never understand. Like, we don't have anybody in our system that we can bring up and can play a better role than Andy Andrioff. He didn't skate well. He didn't shoot well. He didn't pass well. And supposedly he brought some toughness to the lineup, but it seemed like every time he got in a fight, he lost. But I got nothing personally against Andy Andrioff, but he was a guy that I just was always kind of my whipping boy, if you want to call it that, while he was with the Kings. Also in 2011, the Kings selected forward Nick Shore in the 3rd round, 82nd overall. He's kicked around in the NHL a bit. But the Kings' first selection in that 2011 draft was in the 2nd round. They took goaltender Christopher Gibson with the 49th overall pick, and he did not work out, didn't play a single game for the LA Kings. 16 total career NHL games, kind of bouncing around here and there, and he's still kicking around in the minors somewhere. But that pick did not work out for Mark Yannetti and his staff. Let's go to 2012, where the Kings had 6 selections. 2 of them would turn out to be solid NHL players. The Kings only had, and again, when you're grading drafts, sometimes you got to take this type of thing into consideration. The Kings only had 1 pick in the first 3 rounds, so kind of hard to get impactful players when that's your situation. But with their first-round pick, 30th overall, they did take forward Tanner Pearson. And he helped the Kings win a Stanley Cup, had some very decent seasons, teamed up with Tyler Toffoli, like we said, on the old That 70s line with Jeff Carter, and is still playing at the NHL level. I believe Tanner is with the Vancouver Canucks at this point, and he was traded for Carl Hagelin in a deal with Pittsburgh. And I did not include that in my critique of Rob Blake and his trades. I probably should have, because that's one that did not work out. Tanner Pearson is still a solid NHL player, a contributor. Carl Hagelin, he didn't do anything when he came to the Kings. I know at the time we were like, oh, we got to get faster, we got to quicker. And Carl Hagelin's a fast, quick player, but he never really did much for the LA Kings. Also in that 2012 draft, the Kings selected defenseman Colin Miller in the 5th round, 151st overall. He would end up being traded to Boston in the Milan Lucic deal. He's now playing for the Buffalo Sabres. He's been a very solid NHL caliber defenseman throughout his career. So of the 6 picks, and again, no first-round pick and no picks in the first 3 rounds, to get a couple of solid NHL contributors out of that, not bad for Mark Yannetti and his staff in 2012. And finally, looking at the 2013 draft, this one, unfortunately, might go down as the worst draft for Mark Yannetti and his staff. They had 7 selections. Only one of them would turn out to be an NHL player, and he never played a second for the LA Kings. The Kings did not have a first-round pick that year as well. Their first selection was a guy named Valentin Zykov. He was a forward. He was in the 2nd round, 37th overall. He never did anything at the NHL level at all. Matter of fact, I don't even know if he played an NHL game at all. There were also some names in this draft the Kings selected, like Justin Auger, Hudson Fauching, Johnny Brodzinski. It was not a good draft for the LA Kings. The one player they actually did hit on decided he didn't want to play for the Kings, and that was forward Dominik Kubalik, 7th round pick, 191st overall. I don't know what the inside story is behind this, but for whatever reason, he didn't want to play for the Kings. He didn't sign with the Kings, even though he was offered a contract. And so the Kings were in a position, it was like, we got to trade him. We got to get something in return for him. We just don't want to pick this player, even though it was a 7th round pick, if we can get something for him. And they did get a draft pick from the Chicago Blackhawks for Dominik Kubalik. He went on to have a couple of very solid seasons in Chicago. He just signed this offseason with the Detroit Red Wings. So that 7th round pick hit, but not for the LA Kings. And that 2013 draft wasn't very good for the LA Kings. So there was a look at the first 7 drafts for Mark Yannetti and his staff with the Los Angeles Kings. We'll take a look at the next 7 drafts coming up tomorrow. We're not going to critique too much the last 2 drafts that Mark Yannetti has presided over, because it's still way too early to figure out if these guys are going to hit or miss or not. There are some names that are very promising, but again, just a very broad look at the first 7 drafts for Mark Yannetti, the longtime director of amateur scouting with the LA Kings. And I think overall, so far, and we're going to talk more about it tomorrow, I think a lot of quantity over maybe quality. We talked about Drew Dowdy. That's a home run. But some of the other first-round picks, Thomas Hickey, Colton Tubert, some of those high picks didn't hit, but a lot of the other picks did hit. The 2nd, 3rd, even the 7th, some 7th rounders hit. So while you maybe could critique some of the high picks, I think you could certainly say that the Kings scouts did their work in the later rounds and ended up getting some very good picks. Alec Martinez in the 4th round. And some others, Colin Miller in the 5th round. So, not top heavy as far as superstar names other than Drew Dowdy, but a lot of quality players that were selected by the Los Angeles Kings. So that's a quick look at the first 7 years under Mark Yannetti. We're going to look at 7 more seasons on tomorrow's show. So hopefully you're enjoying this. Again, it's like I said, I'm repeating myself, but we're painting with very broad strokes here, just giving you an idea of some of the players that the Kings have selected over the past few years. If you have any comments on that, certainly welcome your feedback. We'll give out the email address in just a minute. But I need to tell you that I have a product I use every day, and it's really helped me out as far as how I feel. It's called AG1, and you take 1 scoop of this, and you absorb 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and antigens to help you start your day right. It's a special blend of ingredients that supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. AG1 contains less than 1 gram of sugar, and it costs less than $3 a day. It's cheaper than your morning coffee or your after-work brew, and you're investing in your health. Athletic Greens has over 7,000 5-star reviews and is even recommended by professional athletes. Now's the time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just one scoop in a cup of water, and that's it. No need for a bunch of different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of daily immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Take ownership over your health and pick up the daily nutritional insurance that you need. We got some very sad news to pass along here, and it kind of has a connection with the LA Kings, but mostly kind of from the hockey world in general. If you watched the LA Kings in the playoffs last year against the Edmonton Oilers, and I'm sure you did, you probably heard or saw about 6-year-old Ben Stettler. He was the Oilers super fan and kind of a rallying point for them. He had a brain tumor. He was undergoing treatment and battling cancer. And unfortunately, he passed away today. Again, just 6 years old. Just heartbreaking. And, you know, I've been a part of this hockey community for about 15 years or so as a credentialed member of the media, as someone who's gotten to know a lot of different people in the hockey world, mostly from the media side, but, you know, others as well. And it is amazing to me how at the NHL level, the hockey community can sometimes seem so small in a good way. The outpouring of support today that I've seen on social media for Ben Stettler and his family is not surprising. And yet it just goes to show you what a tight-knit community the hockey community is. And we really kind of look out for our own. And it doesn't matter whether you're an Oiler or whatever. There are bigger things, obviously, than hockey. And when you're a part of the hockey family, like I said, we kind of look out for our own. So I think it's been hopefully a comfort for the family of Ben Stettler to see the outpouring of support and love for their son. I can't even imagine what they're going through. I can't even imagine what Ben had to go through at 6 years old and all those treatments that he had to take and so on and so forth. He was courageous. He battled through it. And unfortunately, you know, not all of these stories have a happy ending, but hopefully I think a lot of people were certainly inspired by his story. And he had a very short life, but he did impact a lot of people. So it is still very, very sad, but proud of the hockey community and for what they've done today, reaching out on social media and giving their love and their condolences to the family of Ben Stettler, the 6-year-old Oilers super fan who unfortunately lost his battle with cancer, but he was quite a little warrior, and all our best to him and his family. There is no easy transition out of that, but I did want to give you a couple of quick updates. One on the World Junior Championships, which are going on right now in Edmonton, Sweden, along with LA Kings prospect Helge Grans, the second-round pick in 2020, won their opening match of the tournament 3-2 over Switzerland. Grans did pick up a secondary assist on the team's opening goal of the tournament. He was a +1 for the game, so a good start for Helge Grans and his team Sweden to win their opening game and him contributing. Coming up on day 3 on Thursday, we've got Team Finland with Kings prospects Kasper Simontopoulos and Samuel Helenius taking on the Czech Republic. That is an 11 a.m. Pacific time game. All these games are broadcast on the NHL Network. They're also, I'm told, streaming for free on Fubo TV and Sling TV as well. So if you want to check out any of those games, that's how you can do it. As I mentioned, I'll be keeping an eye on all the Kings prospects to see how they do as the tournament goes on. We did have a very quick Pacific Division rival report, some news on teams in the Pacific Division. This involving the Vegas Golden Knights. They signed restricted free agent center Nicholas Waugh to a 5-year, $15 million extension. 25-year-old had a career year last year in Vegas, 15 goals and 24 assists in 78 games. And the Golden Knights also signed forward Keegan Colasar, 3-year, $4.2 million contract. He's 25. He also had a career high 24 points last season. And one more note involving the Seattle Kraken. They have added former LA Kings assistant coach Dave Lowry to their staff as an assistant. You might remember Lowry was an assistant for the LA Kings during the 2017 and 2018 seasons under then coach John Stevens. Most recently, Dave Lowry was an assistant and interim head coach for the Winnipeg Jets. He's now with the Seattle Kraken. If you'd like to place a wager On the LA Kings to win the Stanley Cup next season, betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, combat sports, esports, even golf. Head to BetOnline or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. That is BetOnline, where the game starts. To keep up to date on this show and what's going on with the LA Kings, we would like you to please follow us on Twitter. We are at LockedOnLAKings. If you'd like to send me an email with any comments or thoughts about anything that I've been talking about or anything going on with the Kings, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com. That's EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. If you are watching on YouTube, would greatly appreciate a like and a subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much. Now that you've made Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day, and thank you for that, make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast of all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for watching Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia, reminding you as always, go Kings go.